What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes. We are continuing our look ahead train for the offseason. We're on to the Northwest Division. Very quickly, Grant, not that I don't want, if you want to go in depth, it's fine. But actually, we should announce this at the top of the podcast. Be sure to tune into our live free agency stream on June 30th. We'll be hosting on the Bleacher Report app. I think you can also find us in the Max app as well, 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern time on June 30th. So 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific time. I fucking hate you West Coasters. That's such a good, it's a Sunday. What else are you going to be doing? Come watch our pretty faces. But tune into that so that they continue to want to use our shining faces in 1080p. I think we'll be in because streaming in 4K. I don't think that happens just yet. But anyway, go tune into that. Grant, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I mean, so yeah, again, if you don't think our 2.5 hour discussions are long enough, we're going to give you 3. So,
with guests. Yes. Yeah.
Well, it'll be exciting. So we're on to the Northwest here, Dan. Should we just dive into it? We've got all the preambles reposted probably before I started talking or not?
Yeah, well, I just refer everyone back to, we'll get into the limitations of the new apron and stuff kicking in, but go to our central, listen to the first 5 minutes of the Central Division look ahead. And we get into all the, like, we've outlined a bunch of them specifically, but it's better just to, because they don't impact every team. If there's something to note with each team, which the first one, there's some stuff to note with the first team that we're going to get to, we will mention them. You started first last time, so let me take us to the Denver Nuggets, who are not NBA champions, in case anyone didn't know that. So they're going to enter the offseason. Their biggest, it starts with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. He has that $15.4 million player option. As we're recording this, there's no news on it. DeAndre Jordan, early bird right free agents. Justin Holiday, kind of important by the end of the playoffs for them. Not going to lie. He's a non-bird free agent. I would assume he's not going to have more offers than the minimum, so that's fine for them. But this whole thing starts with KCP, because when you look at their salary cap situation, if he picks up his player option, because he might pick it up and extend off that number. We've seen it done before. But if he picks up, let's just say he picks up his player option or they give him an identical salary, they're past that second apron threshold. So that means no mini MLE, no aggregating contracts and trades. I saw something picked up steam on Nuggets Twitter the other day where it was, oh, the Nuggets should trade Michael Porter Jr. for DeAndre Hunter and Bogdan Bogdanovic. 1, they absolutely should. 2, why in the world is Atlanta doing that would be my question. 3, that would, I don't even know what it's called. It would hard cap you.
Yeah, hard cap at the apron.
Between the second apron. So you're basically saying, if you're making that trade, you're saying goodbye to KCP. So are the Nuggets better off? We don't need to get in. I just saw that floating around Twitter, but I don't think you're better off. Like, I'd rather keep KCP and MPJ than have DeAndre Hunter and Bogdan Bogdanovic, right? Like, that makes more sense.
10 times out of 10. Yeah, of course.
Well, so it's that. So, all right. That might say more about how you feel about DeAndre Hunter, which I get it. That's fine. So if they're going to be a second apron team, you're looking at only minimums. Now, the other tool, I call it, is Zeke Naji begins his 4-year, $32 million extension. I know that's a really small percentage of the salary cap, Grant. I also know that he is still relatively young, and the idea of Zeke Naji is still really cool if you don't care about rebounding. But like this, if you could attach, and this is assuming they're even willing to do that, you could throw number 28 before it's an actual salary, because you can't guarantee it. So it has to be when the draft is no longer, that's the sweet spot, is the draft is no longer a future draft, but the player doesn't count as money. I don't know what that gets you. Zeke Naji plus number 28 gets you what? Does it get you Nick Richards? Probably. I'm not giving up a first round pick to get Nick Richards. But they need a backup big. They need an upgrade when it comes to backup playmaking. And I also think this doesn't get talked about enough. And I did talk about this. We had a podcast where we went deep on, or a little bit deeper, but Grace Jean from What's in an NBA was on here. Like, their offense kind of betrayed them by the end of the playoffs. I know they were dealing with injuries and stuff, but the idea, like, you need, I would say, another dynamic offensive player aside from Jokic and Jamal Murray who could maybe attack set defenses, or at the very least, another thing that's not talked enough about this team, just get them threes up in high volume. And to address that with only minimums, you're in a weird situation. That's not to say that they're in a bad situation, because the Nuggets at full strength can still be a really good team. I know their starting lineup ended up not performing well in the playoffs, it's still one of the best 5-man units in basketball overall, I would hazard, if everybody's healthy. So you take that wherever you want to go. And there's also, we'll get into the extensions with Jamal Murray and Aaron Gordon, but it all starts with KCP. If he leaves, by the way, okay, cool. Do you know what that gives you access to? The mini MLE. Like that, you're not getting a pathway to the full MLE unless you're salary dumping. And I really don't, people could throw out these bigger moves. I just don't see them moving one of their, I won't even, like, Jamal Murray and Jokic are non-starters. I don't even see them moving a Gordon or an MPJ. I also don't know who wants MPJ like that. This isn't talked about enough because he has real gravity and he's valuable to the Nuggets. I think there's probably more than half the NBA views that contract as toxic. And maybe because they watched him on Fox News.
Yeah, toxic's a loaded word, I feel like, for him. I think that's right. I mean, like, the way forward for Denver is obviously you have to bring KCP back. Like, we haven't even talked about, like, I think if he declines this player option, what do you think it's going to take to have the best offer for him?
I honestly don't know, because what's his cap hold in that situation is like 22 million, right? So do you think that there's a chance he gets, I'm just using that number as a baseline of that a team would come in if they have a ton of, because he fits everywhere. So a team with cap space, even if they're not trying to compete, he fits there on a 2-year deal. Like, would someone just come in and be like, hey, here's, like, it's like the extreme version of Bruce Brown. Here's 2 for 50 or something.
I mean, like, that's the fit everywhere is the complicating factor. And, like, so say the Sixers miss out on a full max guy. Seems unlikely at this point. It seems like all that money's burning a hole in their pocket. They're going to get somebody at or near the max. Like, 25 a year for KCP is like, yeah, Sixers should absolutely do that as part of a series of other moves. Makes sense in Orlando. Even, like, I mean, we talked about it in the Central. You mentioned, like, what if just Detroit says, like, let's get a guy out here who's going to make life easier on Cade Cunningham and Asar Thompson and everybody else we have here who's going to make shots and defend. Like, if you have cap space, KCP makes sense for your team. Like, there's not pretty much across the board. So I think the cap hold is like of 22. I think it might take 25 to have the best offer. Now, maybe Denver doesn't necessarily have to have the absolute best offer dollar amount wise, because nobody else or very few other teams can offer. You will start and play next to someone in Jokic that, you've seen over the years how much better he makes you. We're going to contend on and on down the list. Maybe that saves you 5% or something if you're trying to field the best offer for him. But, like, you're not getting him back at anything close to that player.
And look, he won 2 titles. This isn't someone who needs to ring chase. So if the bag is thrown at him, he might as well grab it.
Maybe. Yeah, I know. I don't know. So I would be concerned if I'm Denver. At the same time, I just pay what it takes.
Question. Because, and if I'm Denver, I would almost advocate for this, that he could opt in and extend off that number, but the extension would begin the following season. And maybe you're going to have to, like, include more years than you would want to, but it's 21.6 million. So not next year. He'd be at that 15.4 million number. Then his extension kicks in for however many years, but at 21.6 million, that kind of almost feels like the sweet spot. Like, if you offered KCP and said, hey, you opt in, we'll extend you off this number, and a 3-year extension would be 3 years, and I'm rounding up here by a few 100,000, but 3 years and 70, or it'd be is that right? Wow, 4 years and 96.6. Like, is that, if you're KCP, is that, one, appetizing enough? And 2, if you're Denver, do you view it as, okay, we're kicking the can a little bit because we're keeping him cost controlled for another year? Because if he's going to be over 20 million a year anyway, I wonder if that's a more, like, I haven't seen it talked about a ton. I'm just wondering if that's a more, or rather, if that's an actual viable option for both parties.
I think if you got KCP from Denver's perspective at either of those extension numbers, you feel really good about it, because I think
496 is,
again, that's less than 25 a year. You're getting him for another year at 15, right? So, so, like,
but then his extension's kicking in at, how old is he? He's 31, right? So his extension's kicking in at 32.
That's it. So you're going to age 35 but even, like,
I would do the 3-year one without thinking.
No doubt. The 4-year one is still, though, that's almost not even starter money anymore.
And you don't have to give him it's like, it doesn't have to be that. Right. It could be 4 and, like, we're framing it could be 4 and 80, for instance.
But I think you're right to think of the framing in terms of, like, what's the most they could do, because that might be what it takes. I don't know. So I would, if I'm KCP, I guess the question then is from his perspective, would he rather get out there now in a market that like does have some pretty good options in terms of guys that can give him the teams that can give him the bag, or does he want like it's got to be pretty nice to know you got 25-ish million coming your way and you're like age 35 season as a role player? Like that's pretty
Well,
sweet
because the
too.
guaranteed element too is, do you think if he leaves, do you think he's getting more than 70 million guaranteed in his next deal? I would probably almost say no, because I feel like if he's going to leave, it's going to be for this like 2-year balloon offer.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
he's definitely not getting 96 guaranteed in his if he leaves. That would be my prediction. I'd feel pretty comfortable. Like maybe a team would say 4 and 100 right off the bat. I guess it's possible, but
that's the weird number I've had in my head for like, what if Malik Monk gets $100 million? Like if Malik Monk's gonna get it.
And Orlando is a team that could use KCP and might just decide, yeah, why wouldn't we do it? Because by the time like he's halfway through that contract is when Franz and Paolo and Jalen Suggs would all be on new deals at that point. And then it's like, okay, we'll make the decision after 2 years from now. Oh, that's interesting. I'll frame it this way because we need to get off the KCP train for a second. Is I do think the risk of him leaving is higher than it's been painted, because we're all, even myself, viewed as they can't lose him, but their entire plan has been, we want Christian Brown and Peyton Watson, even though Peyton Watson's not playing by the end of the playoffs in that Minnesota series. Like they are that invested in it's the second timeline, whatever you want to call it, that I do think I think their walk away number with KCP is probably lower than what we think their walk away number for KCP should be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I'm almost struggling to think like, do they have a walk away number?
They shouldn't.
But at the same time, I've been talking about the way they've built this roster in the context of like, they are preparing for a walk away or for a loss at some point, because like they've got all these guys that are 25 or younger making 3 million or less, your Browns, Watsons, Strothers, Pickett's, like all these guys that like one or two of them pops and they're cheap and cost controlled, and maybe they backfill some of KCP's minutes. Like they're about as prepared as you can be for a loss like this if they do lose KCP, given the difficulties they have, and just like they're very good, they're very expensive, they're not that flexible. Like they're better positioned to withstand a significant loss of KCP actually specifically than a team like them has any right to be. I still wouldn't feel good about it, just because none of those guys is going to do what he can do for you, which is like at the level that Denver is trying to play at. It's like, it's cool that you have maybe 4 or 5 guys that, might give you some good minutes or develop into more than that. But like Denver is concerned about like who's on the floor at the end of a finals game. And it's like, it's KCP. I'm much more confident in than any of these guys. And that's going to be true for at least a couple more years. I mean, unless something crazy happens developmentally with one of the young guys.
Their offseason is going to be dictated a lot by their own players. So let's run through these quickly. Jamal Murray, eligible for a 4-year, $208.5 million max extension. The question is twofold. Will they offer it, and will he sign it? What are your predictions?
I think they kind of have to, and he will, right?
Yeah,
like,
I think it's yes and yes.
Yeah, I think I like in a vacuum, I don't know if I feel great about that, but you got to do it. You don't know. It's kind of like the KCP thing. Like you're not filling that spot with someone as anywhere near as good.
Aaron Gordon is eligible for a 4-year. I think it's $143.3 million extension.
I feel like
that's offering it. Is he taking that number? I feel like that number could be, I was gonna say lowered from like the actual max point, but I'm trying to extend him because you see he might be important to your backup big rotation still, which you don't want him to be. That's like you want to make sure that maybe you get a point where Jokic isn't playing as many minutes or as many games in the regular season as you need, but you also don't want to do that at the expense of, Aaron Gordon's defending 5s more often than he was this past season.
Yeah. No, he's really, I mean, it's like we're going through all these supplementary starters and they're like, they're really important. Like, no shit. They can't lose.
No shit. Who's more? I think Murray's more likely to sign an extension than Gordon, though, because it just feels like his actual number would be tougher for them to internally figure out.
I think I agree with that. Yeah.
Things they need. We already went backup big shooting, backup playmaker. We're assuming they're gonna have minimums to address it. Anyone stand out, or even if it's a trade target with the Zeke Nnaji special here. I would say this is might be sicko shit, but if OKC declines Lindy Waters, the third team option, they need to be all over that.
I mean, I wouldn't be against if you're talking minimums. Just like if you mentioned, like just get some shooting. Like this is not full, just like full. I don't know, like PSA. Like none of these names are gonna wow you. So just like be advised. Like your Doug McDermott's, your Joe Ingles, like your guys that aren't going to be on the floor at the end of big games, but that are going to at least prop up your non-Jokic minutes with some shooting, maybe like that. Those types of guys, like. I'm struggling to even think of who else I would really love if I'm trying to find a minimum guy.
And you think
Garrison
it would be easier
Matthews.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Look, Garrison Matthews. I don't know. I'm just looking.
That would be great if you get him for the minimum. Even when, in theory, bigs are supposed to be easier to get, like when you're working it. But I'm kind of like, well, Precious Achua should get more. I assume Xavier Tillman will get more. And so it does feel like if they're going to make a move that lands them someone who is going to be an active part of their rotation, it's probably going to happen like via the trade market, where it's okay, we traded Zeke Najee's salary and got back X. And I don't know what the ceiling is on that type of transaction, especially if you're not including this year's first round pick.
Do you think you get Daniel Tice for the minimum?
I think you could. He'd be an interesting fit. Would he rather play in LA if they're willing to bring him back, though? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe so. Again,
would you like? You don't want to trade the first round pick with Najee to get a backup big. Like that's not something. What if they waive him, but he was so like Kevon Looney, if he's just available floating around out there?
I mean, I think he might get more. Well, would he get more than the minimum?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, because if you're Denver, you could definitely like you say, like, look at what we got. You're gonna play. Like it's just maybe not in the postseason, but you'll play. That's not a bad one. I gotta believe someone's gonna give him a little more than the minimum if Looney hits the market.
You don't think they're not a team that could get Ayo Dosunmu for number 28 and Najee? That's not doing it, right? Would you do that to get Micic from Charlotte? You get off Najee's money. Micic is a little cheaper. Definitely not. Oh, they also have Reggie Jackson as a player option. I'm assuming he picks it up. So, but that money doesn't work in this instance either. But maybe you're thinking, well, if we can compensate someone to take on Reggie Jackson with second round equity, and this trade gets actually, you could just do Reggie Jackson and Zeke Naji based off Charlotte's cap space and number 28 for Micic. Is that something that's like, well, no, you can't. You can't combine salaries for them. Oh my God.
No.
See?
Well, this is another one. Like, can you finagle it so you're not above the apron? I mean, I don't know.
Not with KCP coming back. I wouldn't think that you could. But would you do Najee and 28 for Micic, or is that like opportunity cost too high?
No, I think I would, and I think like Charlotte should be interested in that. I think like you should want the younger guy. I would say, but yeah, once KCP is back, then we're just back into the like we can't. You could still obviously aggregate a draft pick and a player, but yeah, I don't know. Then maybe you just are getting. Yeah, Najee's such a. We started this with Najee, and it's like he used to be such a darling. And now it's almost like
has pivoted all the way back to this is the Najee breakout campaign, and then it never happens. But you could, even if you prefer backup big like Najee and something like pick equity for Nick Richards. I'm just going to name all Charlotte players. You want Cody Martin on this team? You want... yeah, pivotal offseason for them. I do think KCP will be back, but I don't feel great about making that prediction.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident. I think it's not going to be cheap.
And if I had to guess, they're not going to trade their first round pick. They'll be, well, we have Julian Strother who's going to give us the shooting next year. That'll come. And we have Watson and we have Brown, Hunter Tyson. So, and maybe they might even not care about getting a back. Maybe they view Jalen Pickett as someone who can give them backup playmaking. But I think they'll get like imagine if Kyle Lowry was willing to sign for the minimum. That'd be a great, I would love that fit for them.
Yeah. Of course. Let's go to another team with a pivotal offseason. Sort of. Everyone would have you believe it's super pivotal. We're kind of not of that mind exactly, which we'll get into. This is the Minnesota Timberwolves. So Kyle Anderson, Monte Morris, Jordan McLaughlin are free agents. Their salary cap situation, they're like Denver, are in the 190 plus range, 195 in salary commitments. If we do not include any new contracts for Anderson or Morris or McLaughlin. So that makes their best spending tool the minimum. We just need to talk about the I don't know what you'd want to call it. It's not a groundswell. It's like the cacophony of they got to trade Cat. They got to do, this will be belaboring it for us because we've talked about it several times, but just explain to the good people why the urgency for a Towns trade is not what a lot of the rumor mill would have you believe it is.
One is that you could just say, we'll revisit this next year. Like, we're going to eat it up for a year. We just made the conference finals, because that's what you should do. But you also have until the end of next season to get out of the tax or to cut your tax bill. Now, the challenge there is if you're looking to duck the tax entirely, that is way easier to do over the offseason when teams have cap space. But if this team that just made the conference finals, we don't know who, this is the actual biggest offseason question, because roster-wise, this should be uneventful. You said it, and that's what your delivery of it was, just made me laugh. Their best spending tool is the minimum, and like maybe they re-sign Kyle Anderson. It should be a rather uneventful offseason. And if it's eventful, it's because they're probably doing something fucking stupid. And so if Glenn Taylor or A-Rod and Mark Lure, they're looking to cut costs, they should not be allowed to own an NBA team at that point, because this team is freaking good. You have until the end of next year, though, to cut to the end of next league calendar year, certainly up until the trade deadline, to slash your tax bill. And so this team should still be together. I think it will be together unless maybe they get bowled over by an offer for Karl-Anthony Towns. I just don't know what team is going to force them into doing that. And so it's really like, we don't need to get into the ownership stuff, but there's not a lot to talk about this team other than who could they get for the minimum.
Right. And like the answer might just be, so like, if Monte Morris had not played for them this past season, we would say like, that's somebody they should probably look at. So like,
we can name Lowry here too. If I don't know, I'm sure Philly might actually give him more money because it has cap space and he's from Philly.
Right.
But like, I would argue, unless Paul George is going to Philly or they're making a Mikal Bridges trade or something, I still think that Minnesota or Denver should have higher title odds than Philly. And so if Kyle Lowry wants to go somewhere to chase a ring and maybe still get good amount of playing time, Minnesota would be fantastic for him.
I was just looking up because Mike Conley is going to be 37. So like you mentioned the playing time, there might be a situation where this backup point guard that will sign for the minimum has way too much playing time, like, or at least like a lot, whether you're talking decline or an injury or whatever. So like someone like Morris, I know I just said like, oh, they should look at him. I mean, that guy's had injury issues too. Kyle Lowry is like, this is, if you're trying to, if you're concern trolling for the Wolves, you start with like, the point guard position is actually, the backup point guard is like really, really important for them potentially. Now, Edwards might handle the ball more.
Yeah, and you need that person to actually like be able to make decisions on the ball. It's not just Patrick Beverley doesn't make sense here if he's healthy.
No, and shoot it, I think too, because if the theory of the team is that Edwards will be on the ball more and more, like that's part of what made Conley so valuable, is he's a dangerous spot up guy. So like this is a tough spot to fill.
They're like maybe Cameron Payne, but like, did he play himself above the minimum territory?
I mean, maybe like, so someone like Fultz, for example, probably not a minimum guy, but like
you just said they need to shoot.
It doesn't make sense. Like you can't, like, that's what I mean. Like even flawed players are tricky fits. I'm like scrolling way down the free agent list.
I mean, like you could, but this doesn't address the point guard. I think you're actually going to have to get to a point where you're looking to add these elements to your rotation or the back of it through different players, where it's okay. We got, let's say DeLon Wright came for the minimum. And then we got Joe Harris, who hopefully he's able to like, can he regain his stroke? Like that might be the type of free agency options they're looking at. And even if you want to get into trade stuff, they can't aggregate salaries here. And it's okay. So we're going to assume they're not going to trade Cat. Why would you trade Conley? You're not going to trade Ant. Like, what is it? This, I feel like they can't trade Naz Reid. It feels like he's going to wind up with a statue. But if they traded someone from their top 6 guys and you had to rank them, would you still have Karl-Anthony Towns at 1?
Of the guys most likely to be traded?
From the top 6. If they, I'm using this as a means to a different exercise.
Okay.
But like, so we know that Anthony Edwards isn't going anywhere. Right. But like, would you consider, my point is, would you consider trading? Who of the top 6 would you actively consider trading if you wanted to get better or balance out your rotation? Could the answer actually be Naz Reid?
Yes, it absolutely could. And he has the opposite problem of Cat, which is like the player type and dollar to production value for that player type is like highly favorable to Reid. and not favorable at all to Cat. I thought you were going to get into Jaden McDaniels and like, are we going to talk about this?
Well, I'm saying, would it be, that would have been my question is, if you were at, look, if you went in and said, because so after you get past the top 6, it's like, well, what is Nickeil Alexander-Walker's salary actually going to get you on the trade market when you're talking $4-something million? Not much. Like, who's the
Nobody
player
better than him for that money?
Right, it has to be better than him or even better fitting. So of those, if there was like, of those 2 players, if you thought there was a deal that if you did mess with your top 6 that would make you better, how do you think it's easier to do that by trading a Jaden McDaniels, by trading a Cat? But I honestly think it would be harder to get better while trading Karl-Anthony Towns, just because not only the idea of Karl-Anthony Towns, but his number is so massive going into that extension that it's just going to weed out a bunch of teams organically.
So I was thinking, if you're comparing Reed versus McDaniels, like the way I would frame, I would say I would be more inclined as Minnesota to trade Reed again, like just because like if Reed has an awesome playoff series, it feels like a bonus and that's awesome. And then Minnesota like wins that series more often than not. If McDaniels has, but if Reed doesn't contribute or has a bad one, you're okay still, just because he's your third big and you've got stuff elsewhere. If McDaniels doesn't play well, like that's a big deal, because that means like he's not making shots, he's not getting guarded, it's compromising your offense everywhere. So like, I think if you're just asking, I know this isn't exactly what you're asking, but I would have to think about this if you're ranking trade candidates for the Wolves. Like, you can just afford to lose Reed more than you can afford to lose McDaniels. And that's considering the difference in what they cost. Like McDaniels is basically 2x Reed, right? Close to it, 13.9 next year to 22.6. That said, I don't think you can. I don't know that you want to trade either of those guys.
No, I would. I wouldn't. I would just
anybody if I'm
So 2 things that I think need to be touched on with this team would be, so Rudy Gobert is extension eligible. Would you, if you're the Wolves, consider, let's have him decline the player option as part of that extension, and then we will extend him off of a lower number to make things more tenable? Or are you letting this ride out? Like, you know, he has the player option for the summer of 2025 at $46.7 million. And that, you know what, we'll deal with the ramifications of maybe he just opts out and we sign him to a smaller deal then. That's the longer term, or we pay him the 46 and we're extend. I would be, I'm stumbling because I really don't think an extension's a possibility for him. But if they're that worried about the operating costs, having him decline that and extending it to smaller number could wind up working for them. But I almost find myself wondering, it might be better for them, because then in theory, the drop off in salary could be larger, is let him opt out next summer if that's what he's going to do. Or worst case scenario, he's just this massive expiring contract.
Yeah. I mean, he's such a difficult player to like, I don't know, determine like how he is most valuable contractually going forward, just because, you know, the guys like him, where if you acquire him, he fundamentally changes kind of like everything your team does. That limits like his suitors. It limits what people are willing to pay. But he's obviously this year, certainly like hugely impactful. Like, I agree. I don't think an extension is likely for him. And I think of the options you presented, I might just let him play out, like pick up that player option and then just, I guess technically it's an ETO, but same difference.
He had an ETO.
That's how I see it on my sheet.
Oh, I did not.
Oh, no, you're right. Sorry. Different shade of blue. Player option, disregard. Sorry.
So, and then the other thing with them is, we talked about this with Phoenix, where should they inflate? Let's say you think Royce O'Neal's an $11 million player. You just give him 16 to have that salary slot when you're a second apron team to match salary. Do you see them doing that with either Monte Morris or Kyle Anderson? I feel like it's really just Kyle Anderson is the question here.
Yeah. So this is maybe the first time we've talked about this tactic, and Royce O'Neal is definitely the first guy you think of when you talk about this idea for second apron teams. I think so. I don't know what the fallout's going to be from situations like this, but I would be inclined to juice up Anderson's salary, not like by some crazy degree, but definitely so that he signs with you, because you'll have the best offer, and you want it to be up to a number where when you trade it with a pick attached, it's going to get you someone like substantial that's actually going to play for you. I do think that is a strategy teams in this situation have got to like seriously consider, but like, who knows, you could just be stuck with a guy that's grossly overpaid and you can't trade him. But I do think don't you feel like when you have no flexibility, this sort of creates a move, like, or at least the idea of one.
He does seem more important to them as this conceptual salary matching tool in a trade than as a player now. Whereas
Yeah.
I don't know if I would have said that at the start of this past season. I probably wouldn't have said it.
I mean, that's kind of true of there's not a lot of them, but almost everyone in that position. Like Royce O'Neal, like good, like probably could start and close for Phoenix, but like I think he still just matters more as like a way to go get somebody that's better than him. Like as hard as that's going to be to accomplish, I think definitely in Anderson's case, because he's your fourth
And it's
big guy.
maybe you could set it up where it's a 1+1 with the team option. So you could go if it's 2 for 30, and then it's well, we know this is just going to be this year. And if we're
Mhm.
trading him, a team views as an expiring contract. If not, we roll over the quote unquote flexibility the next summer where we make this decision again and see what
Yeah.
we do.
Yeah. This is one of my favorite wrinkles. I'm really curious to see what teams do with exactly this type of
I will
situation.
say though, if you're gonna do it, and this is why I think the Suns are the best analog for it, you need to be prepared to then put your distant first round equity on the table because in all likelihood, that salary alone, you're not going to acquire a contract that a team views as so toxic, but it's actually going to help you.
Yeah.
Although you'll be like the funniest thing is like we see Royce O'Neal sign for exactly how much Zach LaVine is making next year, just something like crazy like that.
Yeah. There'll be some serious telegraphing. I mean, we're getting way into the weeds, but like you got to make sure in certain now, not everybody, I don't think anybody's so hamstrung with picks that this would be an issue, but like, don't do this, get into the second apron again and get your pick frozen. Like, because
Right.
then you're just like, well, what if that was our only way out? You got to be careful. I mean, if the team does that, then we got to probably hire a new front office, but that like, that's something you got to think about when you're a second apron team.
Let's go on to our next team in this division, which is the Oklahoma City Thunder. Gordon Hayward's they're really only notable free agent, although there are a couple players that we'll get into that could end up factoring into this. And I might even mention them right now because so as of right now, they can have more than I have meant like 33 million in cap space. Assuming they renounce Gordon Hayward. They can up that ante if they start declining team options and non-guarantees. But what also could factor into their salary cap situation is do they decide when you're looking at Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins, those are two guys with team options. Would you prefer to decline the team option and re-sign them so that you're getting one of those raises out a year early? And since there's something that's agreed to, you don't worry about them entering unrestricted free agency, or because you have cap space, you renegotiate and extend. So just give them the immediate bump. They're never a free agent. And that takes some even more guesswork out of the equation. I don't think you do that with Aaron Wiggins. I just let him play out the team option. I would consider it with Isaiah Joe for sure. There's an element of disappointment there. It's you had all this cap space, you just had the best record in the West, and all you did was take care of your own, but you would still have money to do other things. When you look at what they need, which I think is like that. Oh, and also Josh Giddey's eligible for an extension. I'll throw out the max. 173.7 over 4 or 224.9 over 5. You do not need to know those numbers because they would be out of their minds to give him anywhere near it. The max starting salary for him would be 38.8 million. I don't know. I'm not signing him that. And very quickly, they need another dynamic, like offensive creator and shot maker, I think, in the half court. That's not Josh Giddey. He hasn't even shown that it could be Josh Giddey. And then I view that as actually a more important need than them adding stuff to the front line, but they do need strength, rebounding, screening up front, preferably someone who could play with Chet, but also independent. So like you kind of want a hybrid 4-5, which can be difficult to find, but not impossible. I think really Chet is your hybrid 4-5. So maybe you view it that way and skew all the way towards the 5. Where do you want to should we start with Josh Giddey? Do you expect him to get an extension? I don't even want to talk about the numbers because like if he was willing to sign like an $18 million a year extension, do you just try to preserve the asset in OKC's case and do that? Or I know Thunder fans, some of them are still holding out hope, but like, I'm done. I'm out.
I'm just so much more fixated on trading him that it's hard to like, so I don't know. You say to preserve the asset, should they give him an extension? Like, I don't know that he becomes more valuable at a higher salary with more years of security. Maybe, right? Like, because that would be
this year because of the poison pill. So if you extend him, you can't move him, basically.
Yeah. So I mean, think about that. So then, no, I mean, if you're the Thunder, I don't think you should extend him, right?
Preserving the asset is not extending him for this season specifically. Yeah, you're right.
So like, And here's, I mean, like we've, everybody's down on Josh Giddey, I guess, except for the people that you mentioned that I have not really heard of. But who are these people? Are these, what else do they think?
Well, they harp on, he goes to these stretches where he like hits these super wide open threes at a decent clip, and then it's look what happened invariably by the end of their playoff run.
Here's the problem. I don't think it's ridiculous to say that Josh Giddey could develop into like a really I mean, he does a lot of things well that a lot of guys can't do. Like good size, great passer, smart offensive player. Like there's a lot of real value adds. Like not on this team. Like on this team, he's essentially like their third creator, right, in their best lineups. And like when things matter, the third creator is not doing anything. The third creator is spacing more than likely, right? And like he doesn't do that well enough. So however good you think Josh Giddey may become, it's just like for this team in particular, this is maybe we do the reverse all the time. This guy's more valuable to this team than he would be anywhere else. That's why he's hard to trade for fair value. Like, that's the more common thing. It's the opposite for Giddey. I think he's more valuable to almost every other team. And so that just augurs further and further towards like, you got to just trade this guy. And I think for me, in conjunction with the cap space, you can fashion all these really lopsided trades where Giddey's going out and a way bigger salary is coming back in that you can accommodate using some of your cap space. You're getting real close to being able to take back like close to like a max guy. Like I don't have the calculator out, but Giddey's
it's over 40
going.
Yeah.
It's over 40. So like, you cannot extend him. You have to move him. I think. And like we should get into like for whom, because that seems like an important question.
Well, it almost has to be. It's not because we can name players like Denny Avdia is one we keep coming back to. He doesn't solve everything, but I would love him on this team. And it's also someone who his salary, his deal is so team friendly that it's like it allows you to max out your other guys. And like where if you trade for Larry Markkinen, your point, you swayed me on it. You do it anyway, and you just figure it out later because you're so good now. And you have these first round picks that if anything ever becomes toxic, you're able just to sort of shape shift on the fly.
Yep.
So you go a number of different rounds. Who's the worst player, the centerpiece player that you would trade Josh Giddey for? And I have a nomination.
Please.
I would do this. So maybe this isn't a good example. Would you trade him? And let's just say the least favorable 2025 first round pick that you have for Kyle Kuzma.
I think I probably would.
But you got to think about it. So maybe that's the name. I'm trying to think of just like, because it's not, and I don't want to use players also that wouldn't technically be available or a team doesn't want, like Atlanta with DeAndre Hunter might be a good thought exercise, but Atlanta has zero need for Josh Giddey of all people.
Yeah. Well, unless they really blow up the back.
Well, I guess you could be trading for DeJounte Murray in that deal, but that defeats the purpose of the exercise that we're going through.
I don't know if you want to go a different direction. I want to talk about Markkinen because like we do have Utah in this division. That's true. Yeah, maybe we should save him. I struggle to think of now, unless you think there's a Paul George reunion coming where you work out a sign and trade, or like maybe you don't have to do a sign and trade. He just opts in, you trade whatever for him. Like, who's the guy that's going to raise OKC's ceiling higher than Markkinen might, as a guy that is like, you want more shot creation, I get it, but him sprinting off screens as a 7-footer while like SGA or Williams is handling the ball is like, that's going to get some attention to a degree I don't know you could find from somebody else that's like, I say realistically available. I don't know how available Markkinen is. We just have speculated him into availability.
Who would you rather have for this team? Because these two players are not available per reporting. Mikal Bridges or Larry Markkinen? For this team, not in a vacuum, for this team specifically.
I think I'd rather have Markkinen. I
think you're right.
Because the volume shooting and just like the 5-alarm fire off the ball stuff is just different with him. And you're still getting side, like that's the other thing. The rebounding is such an issue. Oh, Chet's so thin, they're going to get their asses kicked inside. Like all this stuff. Like Markkinen's not a guy that's going to solve your rebounding problems or like bring a ton of interior heft, but he's still 7 feet tall and he's still big. Like you can, if he's the guy that's on the back line, like it's still a deterrent to some extent. Like I think we agree. We don't want them to go sign like some hulking big. Like we don't want the new Steve Adams, right?
I mean,
that wrecks their spacing.
Right. And it's even with this. So there have been mentions of a threat for Isaiah Hartenstein. What's appealing about, and I think he makes sense there. You can even make a case for Nick Claxton as well. He doesn't space the floor, but Hartenstein hasn't spaced the floor under Tibbs because Tibbs thinks it's sacrilegious to
Not
have
into it.
space the floor. Yeah. But if you're going to go out there, and this isn't in comparison to Mikal Bridges, but the appeal of Lauri Markkanen is he might be in your closing lineup. Is Hartenstein, is Claxton, is if you go out and trade for John Collins, are those guys going to be in your closing lineup? Sometimes maybe, but also as opposed to Case and Wallace or Lou Dort, depending on if Josh Giddey's still on this team. But I don't think you could guarantee it. And so that would be the appeal of a Markkanen, or even if you wanted to use Mikal Bridges as an example, which is also kind of why I know they have the money to burn, but I don't like I'll frame it to you this way. If you could just get, and it costs you a low end first round pick, if you just get Robert Williams III from Portland and you think he's healthy or you're hoping he's healthy, doesn't that kind of make more sense than we're going to go give Isaiah Hartenstein a 4-year, $80 million deal or whatever it ends up being, or no?
I kind of love that just because of the theory of like, what if he's a couple years ago, Boston Celtics first half, Rob Williams, like that.
Because it's also just like his number is 12 million, 13 million versus, and it's only for a couple more years, and yes, they have the flexibility now, but to me, it's like, if you're going to spend a ton of money or a ton of trade assets, it should be for someone that projects to be a part of your closing lineup, at least most of the time, if not all of the time. And if you're going to go spend money on a big, okay, cool. But like, it's not, and it's, I guess maybe I'm undervaluing Chet in this instance though, because it's like, well, Chet is I'm viewing it as, oh, this big comes in and they can't play beside Chet. And it's like, no, Chet could play beside everyone. So maybe Isaiah Hartenstein would be in every type of lineup closer. But that's where I'm approaching this from, is why Markkanen would appeal to me more than, like, even going all in on a Markkanen trade would appeal to me more than paying, who I think Isaiah Hartenstein's fantastic. Maybe my Knicks bias is creeping in. I just don't want him to leave. But something like that to me feels like it raises your ceiling more, where if you're paying Hartenstein, it's more like we're just kind of evening out the roster here.
This is how I feel. Tell me if you agree. I think, like, I can't remember the last team that operated sort of more conservatively, more deliberately than this Thunder team over the last several years, with all the picks they're hoarding, like all this other stuff. Like, right now is when you get a little reckless, because you're going to lose this opportunity. You're like, you're not going to have cap space again. You're going to, I mean, probably, because you got all these awesome young guys that need extensions. So like, you've got all these picks that your own are certainly getting less valuable, and like, you can't use them all, because already we've had a roster crunch with this team, and like, where it's just like, how are they going to onboard all the picks that they have? Like, you can't, there's no like reserve section of your roster that you can just stash guys. These picks turn into humans that you have to pay. Like, I think now, so whatever it is, if it's overpaying for Markkanen, if it's overpaying for Bridges, if it, like, whatever that even means, like, I think just my broad perspective on OKC is like, this summer is when you swing, and like, Robert Williams is a risk. I do it. I don't care. I want the upside, like, because this team is close enough to being a title team right now, and it's just not going to have an opportunity again to like cash in all this stuff and accommodate a big move. So like, the more I've thought about this team, the more I'm convinced of that, like, this is the time to do the big move, and I'd be disappointed if they didn't.
I don't think they're going to make like the big move, and I don't view Robert Williams III as a big move. I could see them doing something like that. Are there any, though, free agents aside from Hartenstein or Claxton that, whether they're big money or not, that you think would, the name I've mentioned, and I think some people have laughed at me, is, I don't know how much his market has fallen or how long the contract is. People like Tobias Harris bring Tobias Harris off the bench here. I don't hate it.
You would close with him more than you would with Giddey, if we're going to use that as a metric, right? Because he's a shooter that defenses will actually pay attention to. And like, I think Tobias Harris is going to be undervalued, I think, just because of what he used to make.
Caitlin Cooper calls this a soul tax, where a situation gets so toxic that it could actually skew the player's value and practicality. It's actually happening in reality, but that's actually not how bad they are. And this feels like the perfect situation. Like, yeah, this is a soul tax situation of what happened in Philly.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. So I think I want it to be a combo forward, kind of like that. I don't know who else is even out there.
Well, because you want someone who's like, it's not just floor spacing or even fits, it's can maybe generate their own shot on occasion. And we know Tobias Harris ebbs and flows there, but there's just not like, you're not getting LeBron James. I don't think you're going to get Paul George, although both those guys, hey, that's fine with me. The player I want them to get, although it would be lower on, I wanted them to get more dynamic offensively. If he had to leave the Knicks, I would love OG Anunoby here.
Oh my God.
You would have to dump some salary, but like that is the guy. If OG, I'm gonna call it now. If OG Anunoby goes to the Thunder, I'm gonna pick them to win the title next year.
I love it. Yeah, I mean they would have to move a fair amount around, I think, to beat New York's offer by enough to get him. But like
they're not. I mean, like New York, I would assume if they said, "Hey, here's your $42.3 million max," which by the way, if you just dump Josh Giddey in Oklahoma City, you're like basically there.
yeah,
So if you viewed it as Josh Giddey for OG Anunoby, that's a trade you make 11 times out of 10. But that you can't outbid the Knicks for OG unless they really don't want to pay him, which would be a weird stance for them to take.
yeah. I mean this is where you get into just this class just isn't there. I wish there were more guys that so you could take reckless swings at in free agency, but they're just
there's like there's smaller players that could make some sense, but like when you have, and not that Shea's small, but when you have Shea and Case and Wallace and even Giddey there and Aaron Wiggins, it's those types of guys, and Jalen Williams. It's no, like this needs to come in the form of a combo, like a wing or bigger type of player.
I think just now this is like small potatoes for them because I just spent 10 minutes talking about how I wanted to be ambitious, but like Fontecchio is someone they should look at. Even Miles Bridges, I think like if you can get over all the Miles Bridges of it, like that's the type
Miles
of
Bridges
you're
and
talking
Josh
about.
Giddey on the same roster. Oof.
Well, get in every just as a disclaimer, everything I talk about with the Thunder assumes Josh Giddey is already gone. Like that is how I'm operating going forward.
Would you take, if he promised to rebound like it was 2022, would you take and they don't want anything, would you take the Andrew Wiggins flyer for this team?
If he does anything like it's 2022, I mean he's better than OG Anunoby if this is the version of Andrew Wiggins we're talking about. So
well, okay, so then in a vacuum, I probably wouldn't do it. Like I just like that would be if you turn your cap space into Andrew Wiggins. I'm not gonna lie, I'd be pretty uninspired.
That'd be a risky move. That might be too much risk even for me. And I'm telling them they should do the wildest shit they can think of. Derek Jones, not enough shooting, probably. Although I don't know, I don't hate that. KCP, Melton, Klay Thompson, like you could sort of talk yourself into almost anything, but I do agree that it's got to be someone that skews like towards the 4-5 side, even like a big 3 or something like that. And maybe it's just going to be Tobias Harris, Najee Marshall. I don't know.
Najee Marshall would be great, but I'm still trying to think of which player can we get that checks at least 2 of the 3 boxes we laid out, or like we laid out a shit ton of boxes, but Najee Marshall feels like he kind of doesn't check any of the boxes that like he fits, but he doesn't necessarily check. I'd probably give you like some, if you're next to Chet, like, okay, maybe give you some rebounding there, but it feels like he checks none of the boxes.
I mean, this is why it's marketing, because you're not getting anybody else that's gonna improve you as much as he could.
I mean, what about Jeremy Grant? Reunion with him? No rebounding, but in terms of shot creation, but also stretches the floor.
Yeah, I mean you know what? I'm telling him to take risks. I think
look. So him plus Robert Williams about like $50 million in salary. They have 30 in cap space. They just got to send out 20 to make it work.
Easy. You got all these picks to pay people to take salary you don't want. You could clear the decks.
I do. If we're trying to predict what I think they do, is I think they will like a Tobias Harris. I could see them looking at a Robert Williams trade. I could foresee. It wouldn't shock me if they did the Hartenstein type of deal, but I think this is going to be more about futzing and fiddling rather than making the real needle nuclear nudging move. And I would like them to make that move, but I just don't think they're going to. I'll be pleasantly surprised if I'm right.
I wish I disagreed with you, but I kind of do think that nothing they've done to this point suggests that they're like, all right, here it is, time to cash in.
What makes it tough too is that, and this isn't wrong to view it this way, basically everyone on their roster except for Josh Giddey might get better. And that was Shade. Everyone except like Shea is probably at his peak. He's not going to come in and, he's a 40% 3-point shooter on 8 attempts a game. Like that's probably not going to happen, but there's no one that's part of their core that's going to get worse. And pretty much their entire core should get better. And so they're probably viewing it from that end of the spectrum as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. Again, maybe this is the last thing I'll say. The thing that gets worse is your opportunity to like take a swing. So if you ever want to do it, I think you do it.
I would like to see them so could they do a combination of things where it's okay, we're not going to get a player who's going to be the most expensive player moving forward, but we're saying we've created our own trade market, but it's not to the extent that it was Mikal Bridges or Larry Markkinen. It's like we went and we forced the Hawks to trade Jalen Johnson to us. So like we just made an offer. He has a year left on his rookie scale. We'll extend him. I want to see them do something like that.
Right. So
I come back to Avdia there, where it's such a team-friendly deal, not a star, but I'm going to force his team to trade him to me because we have the assets to do shit like that.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I might like that even more than just like recklessly going and getting Jeremy Grant, because you're like, oh, you don't want to trade this guy? We'll make you. You don't have a choice. You'll get fired if you say no to 4 first-round picks for Jalen Johnson or whatever it is.
Do you want to take us to the next team?
Yep, we got Portland coming up next here.
Moses Brown. Quick.
Yeah, Moses Brown's a free agent. Hold
on. How much do you think he gets?
Dan, can I tell you, I was not prepared to forecast Moses Brown's 24-25 salary ranges.
Did you have any inkling? Did you at least know that? Because your face looked a little terrified when I told you to hold on.
Because I was like, what did I forget? Like, is Shaedon Sharpe a free agent somehow after 2 years? We need to talk about what his next deal looks like. So you know what? I'm going to go off script a little bit. This is a team that has a bunch of veterans. We could just list them off. We've talked about Robert Williams. We've talked about Jeremy Grant. No, we haven't mentioned Malcolm Brogdon yet. Who else am I thinking of? There's a fourth one.
That's the extension eligible Malcolm Brogdon to you.
Right.
Sir.
Extension eligible Malcolm Brogdon to me. Oh, DeAndre Ayton. I didn't say him.
They don't view him. He played better towards the end of the year when he stopped sleeping on like a bed of pine cones and needles or something. I don't know what happened with that, but
was he sleeping outside?
Yeah.
That seems like a bad idea. And it's just like, to what extent can Portland sort of reorient itself?
Well, here's the actual thing. You didn't forget it. We would have gotten to it. They are in the tax.
Right. 169.5, I think, which is like a top 12 figure for a team that won 21 games. And that's not accounting for
that's not going to stand. And they could also, if you're going to keep Jabari Walker, yes, they probably will. Kamara, they will keep non-guaranteed. Delano Bannon. So let's say you get rid of Delano Banton, like you're still at 15 roster spots when you factor in their 2 first-round picks. So like there's going to be, between the tax and just the roster spot issue, there's going to be shuffling, but you're early enough in your rebuild where it's, well, we're going to get extra first or just these flyers on young players. I'm assuming you were going there with this before I rudely interrupted you to mention the tax thing is who's like, of all you could throw Matisse Thybulle in there. He's not super old and they could use some wings, but like who is the most likely player to be traded on this team?
I mean, why isn't it Brogdon? Expiring $22.5 million salary, plays a position where you have 3, depending on how you feel about Simon's future, at least 2 and maybe a third guy that needs minutes. And Brogdon is someone that, you know, if he's healthy, we keep talking about who can close for a good team. I don't know if he's there anymore, but would definitely play. Like
he'd be great in Detroit, actually.
Sure. Like he's got like pretty, so like, I think it'd be more important for them to get off like Jeremy Grant, for example. But I think Brogdon is just like the easy.
Unless you're going to, and I wouldn't, unless you think he's going to be more valuable, unless you're planning to extend him and you think that you're preserving the asset that way, I'd be with you. But this question is more fascinating. Who then is the second most likely player to be traded?
I mean, I want to say Grant, but the length of that deal and his age, he's already 30. I think if I'm going to say Brogdon is one, maybe Robert Williams needs to be the second one because that's a movable number.
Not that you're a believer in Ayton, but like if you can get a first-round pick for Robert Williams a third at this point, because even at his peak, how many minutes is he playing?
Oh, 25, if that.
So I think I would, if you could get a first-round pick for him, and I mean, OKC might give you 2 at this point. Just so I would agree with you there. And I think Grant is probably just at the end of the list because I don't think they actually view him as a pillar, but there's got to be some type of just he wanted to be there. He likes being a featured option too. And so like that's someone who's gonna eat up possessions for you while you suck. And
Yeah.
like there's value in that. So I actually think I'm curious. Do you think that Anthony Simons is gettable just because of the sharp scoot situation?
I mean, I feel like we've almost manifested him being gettable, or at least I have.
But
Like how
only to
many?
Orlando. We don't
Yeah,
mention any other team other than the Magic.
never. It's always Orlando. It's like the only. It's just like, has it not happened yet? Or is he actually already in Orlando? No, I think he's gettable. I like just on the same idea of in the best. Again, it's so early to be thinking about anything like this with a team as bad as Portland has been and as young as its core pieces are. I don't think the best version of Portland features him as a starter. So then it's like, if you can extend him at money that paints him as a six man, cool. I don't think he's going to accept that. Like he shouldn't accept that. So I think you look to moving him because I don't know that it's realistic to project him as a core piece. So like, and like, what is he? So he's making 24 or no, 25, almost 26 next year, almost 27.7 the year after. So if you don't move him now, he becomes an expiring deal. If you don't extend him,
that's
go
what I was
ahead.
going to say is would he be more valuable on an extension? His max extension feels like it might be a little steep for him. But again, maybe I'm getting caught up in the raw values. But 3 years and 125.5 million tack ons, that's over $40 million a year for Anthony Simons on average. But like, I don't know, 3 for 100. Do you think he's more or less valuable when you're tacking that on to his current deal?
Well, we keep talking about like the asset preservation and let's extend the guy because that'll make him more valuable to the acquiring team because of the security. Like, does it happen that often that someone gets extended and it's very clearly done for the purposes of trading him? It's like it's harder to come up with examples of that, and it seems like what happens more is you trade the guy and then he extends with his new team. But I'm sorry to answer your question. 3 for 100. I think I think that changes his value in like a negligible way, I would say. Now, if you're asking me like next year, him being expiring versus having more money, then yeah, you probably do it. But if your plan is to trade him this year, I think you don't extend him. If that makes sense?
No, that's fair. Would you do this? Would you do Karl-Anthony, the number 18 pick, and then a 2025 first from Orlando? It'll be the most favorable from Denver or Orlando for Simons. Is that enough to get Simons, or does it have to be Anthony Black instead of Karl-Anthony?
Yeah, I would push hard for Anthony Black. Um, I'm getting two firsts and another kind of sixth man type for Simons.
So I'm just like, where does Black? I know he plays defense, but where does Black? Unless you believe in him as a backup playmaker, where does he necessarily fit into this team? Like he
Don't
has
you
the
think
cachet of I was just drafted in the top 7, but
isn't he big enough to like be a 3, like be a DeLon Wright? He sort of was a point guard and now he plays the 3 because he can guard 1, 2, 3.
yeah, that's
And
I might almost prefer Karl-Anthony just because of like the scoring pop. But if I'm Orlando, giving up Anthony Black and 2 firsts for Anthony Simons, that seems
that's
to
a
me a
lot.
little steep. Yeah.
So if I'm Orlando, I think I'm good with the package you mentioned. And then if I'm Portland, I feel like Orlando's winning the deal, I guess. And if I could get Anthony Black, I definitely do if I'm Portland, and I maybe don't if I'm Orlando.
So like you would prefer if you're Portland, would you prefer just Anthony Black and the 2025 pick?
Yeah, I think I would. I think it's just Black has. I don't know why. I just have this theory of Black like making sense as like a connector who defends next to two guards that might
He's
not be good at either of those things.
I don't know if he's going to go the route of Chris Dunn, where it's like he just never figures it out. Chris Dunn had moments
Possible.
in Utah, yada yada. But like such a good defender that you're going to be talked about in the all defense conversation at some point if he plays enough minutes, I think.
And he has like the, I don't know, I keep the connective like offensive, like he sort of gets it in like almost like a giddy kind of way where it's just like he's gonna make the right passes. He tries to get off the ball quickly, like, or at least I think that's the type of player he's gonna become. So yeah, the shooting piece of, if the shooting never comes around or like isn't playable, then what are we talking about here? But I like the upside of him so much more than Anthony, that I might give back a pick to get him.
If OKC gave you the least favorable of their 2025 first round picks, would you trade RW3 and let's say give them back number 40 this year. Would you do that, or is that not enough?
So I'm basically getting a something in the 20s for RW3, and I'm giving up him and a pick in the 40s.
Well, actually, so let me look at there really quickly. So their potential first round picks in 2025. So it'd be the least favorable from Houston, the Clippers, Miami, Oklahoma City, or Philadelphia. There's a bunch of, so it'll probably be Oklahoma City's one. The other teams, there's actually a lot of boomer bust potential. So if they shifted it and said like the second least favorable or something, would that do it?
I might, just because isn't there a scenario where Robert Williams is just literally never healthy?
Right.
I think I'd be persuaded to get some kind of certainty. Like a first round pick is a first round pick still. So I think I'd probably do it if I'm Portland.
Anything else on Portland here?
We talked about Simon's extension. Yeah, just
what do they need? Like if you were just trying to build out this run.
for when? Like they need to get rid of these veterans, I think, or at least most of them.
Well, they do feel like they need sort of I would argue they needed at center too, but I think they need like a wing and combo forward cornerstone types. Maybe they get one with one of their draft picks this year, but like they don't, like Jeremy Grant, Matisse Thybulle, like Jabari, like those guys are not. We're scaling ahead 5 years to the next iteration of the Blazers, like that. We know Shaedon Sharpe and Scoot. You might not be super high. I'm like, okay, that's like sort of those are our tentpole prospects. Yep. They need those on the front line. I would even include center there. I'm not a DeAndre Ayton guy. But
no. I'm not either. I think it's so hard because you're building out a team based on two guys that you've seen like next to nothing from. You just really have no idea how good Sharpe or Scoot will be, or even like what they'll be good at. We have some idea, but it's like, I guess so based on that, that's why I like Anthony Black so much. It's just like, well, I think he's going to defend a lot of positions and pass the ball. And
so need to look at a wing prospect. They need to trade for a guard.
Yeah, well, all right, that's probably enough on Portland.
Utah.
That takes us to Utah. Go ahead.
So they have Chris Dunn's a free agent. They have early bird rights on him. Talon Horton-Tucker and Kyra Lewis Jr. free agents. Kyra Lewis could technically be a restricted free agent. I don't think they're going to give him a qualifying offer. Their salary cap situation at a glance is, hey, we could just carve out $30+ million in cap space. And that's a lot of cap space to have. However, the biggest, like you look at the needs for this team, like they need wing defense. I think they could probably use a veteran floor general, even if you believe that Keontae George is the guy. But it kind of comes back to their biggest question. We've seen reports that they'll go big game hunting. Is that one, accurate? And two, does that only happen via trade? Because I'm just assuming Larry Markkinen renegotiates and extends his contract. And if you're going to max him out, it eats up 24+ million in your cap space. Do you expect, maybe that's the actual place to start. Do you expect them to renegotiate and extend him? And if so, is he getting the max?
Let's talk about that, because we need to go down all the like potential pathways for Markkinen. So you can use your cap space to renegotiate and extend. You can let him go to free agency and sign him to a new deal. Then you can trade him. So like so they can get to, what's his max? Like 42.3. I'm just going off the top of my head. I think
that is it. That's the max start. And I think his contract, if you go the 4-year route for him, because he's been in the league for 7 years.
It's like 204, I want to say, is what you
for the 4? Isn't that 189.5?
I don't know. This
good thing it would be kicking in immediately. So it's not like the Donovan Mitchell extension here.
No, right. I was just like, what is it? Because you could go to 42.3, then you extend off of that for 3 more, right?
Yeah. Right. So I'm assuming that the raise is, I would have it. I think it's 4 and 189.5. I'm pretty confident.
Okay. Let's go with that. Is there?
Oh no! Wait. Is that no? I think it's whatever. It's a lot of money, so it's around that. His situation's unique but also they could do a different thing where it's you're renegotiating and extending, and is his salary actually declining because he's not, like, in a vacuum, is he a max player? I guess he would get, if he was hitting the open market now, would Detroit or even Orlando, I'm just trying to think of teams that could easily get to max cap space. Would OKC would carve out the additional room to give him a max? Would Philly? I guess yes.
I think what would happen is we would be having conversations about like hey, here's why it makes more sense to give Lauri Markkanen the full max than Paul George or whatever for like certain teams. I think it would at least be if a team signed him to the full max, you wouldn't. It would be like, yeah, I guess, make. I don't think it would raise a ton of eyebrows. So, I think he might get the full max if he were on the market right now.
I'm also thinking now you're probably right about his extension is so that they would have it for 5 total years. It would 24 million in cap space to get up to the max this year, and then you could offer him the same extension that Donovan Mitchell is technically eligible for, which would be the 4 and 208.5. So you would all of a sudden have 5 years and 240 plus million dollars tied up in Lauri Markkanen, unless I'm misreading the renegotiate and extend rules there. Point being, I do expect him to be at the max salary next year, or at least like close to it. Like maybe he gives them a discount because they're giving him an immediate raise that they don't have to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that. I think that. So you pencil him in, and then your cap space is vaporized,
unless you're moving Colin Sexton and Clarkson to do that. Sexton's extension eligible too. This one I am super confident in. He's eligible for a 3-year extension at 86.1. I just don't think there's a need to extend him based off the direction of your team. So I wouldn't go that route. The real question here is if you're going to renegotiate and extend, and we talked about this where we both said we wouldn't do it because we don't think the Jazz are going to make the requisite aggressive trades to maximize Markkanen at that pay grade. Mm-hmm. And so if you're going to renegotiate and extend Lauri Markkanen, I would like to see you actually not this be a red herring when it comes to being aggressive on the trade market. Go big game hunting.
Yeah, right. At that point. Right. No, I think that's right. And then it's what does that look like? Because you're plenty of picks from the Gobert and Mitchell trades. So then it's just matching salary, which you can use John Collins, Clarkson, Sexton, that you're beyond max money right there. Then though, like you run into, we still got Keontae George, and we still got Walker Kessler, and we still got Taylor Hendricks. Like all those guys project to play a lot. So like just marking in another max guy with 3 really young players, like what are we doing? So I mean, like I'm not saying that makes it a good or bad decision to go big game hunting, like we keep saying, but like it is a little like there's a little bit of ill-fitting. I don't know. It doesn't like who do you all square up?
Because you get into the situation. This isn't even a shot at Utah specifically, because Cleveland would go through the same thing. Is if let's just say they're willing to go big game hunting, you need to be in a situation where that player either wants to be there and will immediately resign with you, or there's enough time left on his deal, a la Donovan Mitchell in Cleveland, to where you think you've given yourself a shot to keep him beyond the 2 or 3 seasons that he's left under contract. And so when you're going to identify the names that could become available this year, I mean, some of them are just so polar opposite to your timeline that it doesn't make sense. Like if Joel Embiid became available, would you go after him? I guess maybe him and Markkanen would be quite a duo. So yeah, bad example. But like that's someone who, when you look at what's left on his deal, it's okay. He better be willing to sign an extension here or just resign when he gets to free agency. And so identifying those types of players where like they're not going to be a team that gets involved in, oh, Paul George opted in, we're going to trade for him. Jimmy Butler's available. They're not going to be that type of big game hunter, but like they're a team that could create their own trade market. We mentioned Mikal Bridges and Lauri Markkanen as these trade targets for teams with all these assets. What if they're just on the same team and Utah trades for Mikal Bridges? Like, does that name do it for you? Or is it, oh, okay, Mikal Bridges, Lauri Markkanen. I bet you Mikal Bridges, if you put Walker Kessler on the table, like that's the one that maybe gets Brooklyn to think. So, okay, so Taylor Hendricks and Keontae George, and like, where does that actually leave you?
It's the same issue. It's a weird, like, I'm almost, as we're just spitballing here, but I'm almost more inclined to go, and the salary gets weird because you're acquiring guys that are cheaper. Like, I don't know if the Rockets are going to choose between extensions for Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun. Like, what if you went and tried to get Jalen Green? Like, I don't know what you got to give Houston to make that make sense, but I'm almost more inclined to find someone that's like, I mean, Bridges kind of fits the bill a little bit, but he's pretty close to Markkanen's age. That's like makes sense between Markkanen and your like ridiculously young other core guys. So like maybe that's someone that the second you get him, here comes the rookie scale extension. It's going to be a lot. And like, that's your version of big game hunting. Like,
or someone who's still on that rookie scale extension, maybe. So like a Jaden McDaniels just about
yeah,
to start it.
yeah. Or like, I'm trying to think other guys in the class that haven't like, or are not locks to get extensions with their teams, like a Kuminga in Golden State, or like Franz Wagner, or like, none of these guys are necessarily available, but like someone in that, from that draft, I guess, basically, or that is approaching extension eligibility, or is going to hit extension eligibility, and their teams aren't like, Wagner's a bad example in that regard because he's going to get it. But that I don't know, because I just have a hard time with the weird, like, okay, we got Markkanen back. He's like in the middle of his prime. And then we got all these guys that are like 3-4 years away from mattering.
Well, I guess what the benefit is do they not need, where we look at it when we talk about Golden State, where it's what's the best player that would immediately elevate them to title contention if they made a trade? But because they, in Utah, in theory, okay, matching salary needs to go out. But when you're looking at their actual young guys, in theory, you don't need to trade any of those dudes necessarily because you have all these picks. And so can we get a player who's not a top 10, top 15 player, but because we have this internal growth possibility along with this player coming in under contract, could you shoot lower? Like, it feels like the player probably needs to be better. I would still do it, but the player needs to be better than Mikal Bridges. I would still trade for him if the opportunity presented itself, unless they're, if Mikal was younger, it'd be a no-brainer. For a second, if it was Jaden McDaniels, I don't think he has the same level of self-creation that Mikal Bridges does, but that's something you can look at. Okay, maybe you overpaid to get him, but because you didn't have to give up any of your core players, and he's on that first max, or not max, but you know what I mean, the first rookie scale extension, you're right. I didn't think there was the level of awkwardness there. I didn't process it as much until hearing you talk about it.
And like, you don't want to necessarily, again, this is like counseling a team to like not draft for need. If you're a bad team, you just take the best player. It's like, Darius Garland might become available for reasons we've discussed on previous editions. Like, but then you're just bringing him in over the top of Keontae George. Like, what's the, because he fits more neatly into the newly created Markkanen age band. But like, this is maybe why you just trade Markkanen. Like, it just because to sort this whole mess out. Like,
well, I think
all the way into the rebuild.
We're in Bulls territory where the Jazz actually have a future. So I'm not using the Bulls as this identical analog, but we know that the Jazz aren't going to do that at this point. I think it's more likely that the Jazz trade Markkanen and the Bulls tear it down, but like, they've kind of portrayed this as Markkanen he's at least going to be here through next season. Like, maybe they look to trade him on his extension, but so we have to operate with that and say, okay, well, now what do you do from here? If that's just what they're doing, you do need to figure out this sort of awkwardness. Right. I'm wondering, would there be value to you? What if you made a series of moves for like these B level, where it's, what if you got DeJounte Murray, who kind of comes in over the top of George, but doesn't, you could play the two together. And he just doesn't make enough money to where it's, we have to commit to him over George right now. And then you went and you got Mikal Bridges. Like, you could make those two moves where it's DeJounte Murray and then a wing type deal. Like, does that, where it's okay, there's no caps lock superstar, but we're leaving open the possibility one of our younger guys hits. And then maybe we just come over the top. Maybe we overwhelm you with the quality of our depth.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about Murray. I do like that as like a really clean fit. If you're trying to make sure not to just hamstring Keontae George's development. I wonder though, like, okay, let's say you do that. Let's say the Jazz trade what it takes, probably in the form of like a lot of draft equity, to get a core of Markkanen's extended, Bridges, DeJounte Murray. Like, that's an exciting team. I think we're both like pretty interested in that. But now, like, how good is that team? And now you've also given up theoretically a lot of your surplus of draft equity to get those guys. And then suddenly, are you just like a 46 to 51 win team that doesn't have a lot of outs anymore? Like, now maybe, depending on the fan base, like, awesome, we'll take it. Like, that might be a good place to be. Weirdly, this is for a team with as much flexibility as the Jazz have. It's like, there's no simple answer. I don't feel like for what the way forward is.
Well, I guess, so we're framing it as they need to do stuff this offseason. And part of that is because if you're going to operate the way they seem like they're operating, is we're presuming that their own picks are never going to be at a high enough level to draft the next player who's the best player on the contending version of the Jazz.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an element of, okay, that's fine, but if we're going to have Lauri Markkanen under contract and all these dudes are still on their rookie scales and we have all these picks, we just wait and we go through another season like this one. And then if Jaylen Brown shakes loose as Boston gets these certain, or the player that actually makes sense pops up and we go get them. But I will say, I feel like we're not considering that scenario enough and there's merit to it.
Mm-hmm.
But this does, I'm pretty sure fans don't want it, but like if Trae Young became available, I do think the Jazz might just be mentioned in the same breath, because if they're looking for big game hunting, he's someone where it's all right. He came in over the top of Keontae George, but that makes sense that he did. You might not love how ball dominant he is, the defensive issues, the stuff that's going on behind the scene. I mean, John Collins is there, so they're clearly not going after
not for long.
But like, if anyone who could make an All NBA team in a given season becomes available, and like I'll say it this way: if anyone who can make a second team All NBA in a given season, not that they're perennial second team All NBA, but like Trae Young could feasibly do that, they will be mentioned, because that's the kind of level of move that you need if you want to become a contender without building through the draft. And just free agency, you're never going to get these guys at that level anymore.
As we're getting, or maybe I don't want to speak for you, as I'm getting like tied up in knots now about like, well, what does make the most sense is the question we should be asking. Maybe like, is Markkanen good enough for us to be making all of our long-term roster building decisions around him? Like, he's clearly your best player now, but is he at the level where you start thinking like, oh, we got to orient a timeline around this guy or all this? Like, I think the answer is probably no, right?
No, you would have to believe that player is in your program already. And I guess feasibly, if you think Walker Kessler for some reason, although they didn't telegraph that this past season with him, if you think he's the next generational Rudy Gobert, or if you I think even more so, you need it to be, we think Taylor Hendricks is Jaren Jackson Jr., but he can create his own looks at a higher rate. Or we think Keontae George is going to be a top 10 player in this league. You have to believe that guy's already, I don't think, and I love Taylor Hendricks, I don't think that level of players in there, which leads me to believe that they're either sitting and waiting, like it's just, oh, we're extending Markkanen and we're just going to sit and wait, or that they fully believe that Markkanen is going to be more valuable as a trade asset on his next deal than if he's an $18 million expiring contract.
Yeah, I think, and there's the whole thing of like, it's Danny Ainge. He's going to just make sure we've got the guy that you want, and we'll keep him until you get desperate enough to do something stupid. And then we will trade him, and we'll hang out until that happens. Cause that's how you build like a real big time winner, is you take advantage of someone that finally gives in and trades something to you that they probably shouldn't for a player like Markkanen. Maybe like everything we've talked about has to be viewed like with that kind of hanging over everything.
Yeah, this team was surprisingly tough, but they're fascinating in a good way because they have so many avenues to explore.
Yeah, which we did at length.
Well, I'm fully twisted into a pretzel at the moment. Right?
I know.
I didn't think I was going to end the podcast like this.
Yeah, I didn't think I was going to have such a hard time with what's the correct decision for the Jazz, but here we are. Got anything else, or should we call it?
We were on pace for that podcast to do it in the time we allotted, basically, and then we went into the Jazz, and it was,
sometimes you got to give the Jazz 25 minutes, or whatever.
And I think that their fans are not going to like anything we said too,
Probably
which
not.
is just like, probably not. So can't even cut it up and use it as a standalone clip because everyone will be mad at us.
You're welcome, everybody that hates what we said. Thanks to those people, I guess, for all the thumbs downs we're gonna get. But that's fine. We've spoke from the heart. Thanks everybody else for listening. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already, give the podcast a 5-star rating. Give us nice reviews. Make sure you're subscribing, whether that's on YouTube, whether that's your podcast distributor of choice. Always helpful to get those numbers up. Grow the podcast. Word of mouth is helpful too. Tell your friends. Tell people you don't like. Tell your Jazz fans, hey, you want to get really pissed off at a 25-minute segment about your team? Here you go.
We go more in depth than 95% of the basketball podcasts out there. So we do tend to, like, the Jazz fans have loved us in the past, but that segment specifically, I think they come up like, these guys fucking suck. Like, we're gonna have Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum on our team next year. Like, they're gonna want to reunite with Danny Ainge.
We hemmed and hawed so much and presented so many different options without committing to what was the correct one. Like, you can't really be that mad at us because we didn't actually say anything, if you think about it. No? All right.
You're not wrong, and that's just terrible packaging for us.
Right.
But you're being accurate. At least you're honest about
Okay,
it. We
whatever.
helped shed absolutely zero light on what the Jazz are doing, what they should do. We just laid out everything that they could do.
Hardwood Knocks, come for half an hour of wheel spinning and leave no smarter for it. Right?
You're welcome. We're perpetual equivocators. We make no apologies. Actually, should we make an apology? Because we have to equivocate.
I really like equivocating, but not always, just sometimes, occasionally. Shouts, Frank Ntilikina. Apologies, Jared Allen.